Oh, that's all right. There were much. Oh, your face is literally gingerbread. Yeah, yeah. So we're gonna kick it off. Let me just get a time check. Perfect. It's 3:08, so not too late. I didn't time this presentation, so if we finish early, maybe we could do some Q&A. I could also do a demo. I was actually gonna get up here and do a demo, but we staged our application live last week on Rinkeby testnet, so you guys can all go play with it yourself. Yeah, so music in Ethereum. I'm Jack Spallone. I'm with Ujo Music, which is a consensus application, or yeah, consensus application we'll call ourselves. A little closer. Going to be talking about a constant tale of building towards decentralization versus going to market. It's been plaguing a lot of applications in this space for the past 4 years. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the music business, as it's pretty important as it relates to Ethereum, and a lot of that context is necessary to understand where the intersection is. So we're going to talk about 3 pillars of decentralization as they relate to music, the value of Ethereum and what it can bring to music, and then at that point I'll give a little bit of background on music royalties and the copyright structure and licensing. And then from there I'll give a brief history of Ujo, what we've done, where we've been, where Ujo fits into music, what we're doing now, and what we hope to do in the future. So, yeah, so quick, Ujo's been around for almost 4 years. It's it's been around for almost 4 years and still in a space that's in its pre-infancy. We have yet to scratch the surface of what can be done, but we've built a lot to get there. So hopefully I'll get a little bit into that today. My background, as an undergrad, I created a blog in college that aggregated all the local events. Instead of going around and finding where events, or what events were where, I decided, why doesn't someone just make a blog that has all the events at all the different venues chronological? I learned really quickly about paid placements and media bias, and was like, oh, this is crap. So I sold the blog, got rid of it. I left the music industry. I wanted nothing to do with it. It lacked professionalism, what have you. Then one of the promoters came to me and was like, hey, I really liked what you did, and we want to beef up our digital promotions. Would you want to get into talent buying? And I was like, that sounds really enticing. I would love to be working with agents. That sounds like a little bit more established than what I was doing prior. So I got into that, and then a few months after that, I ended up losing a lot of money on a show, and I broke even on all my profits to date. So I decided, I'm out of the music industry, and that was the second time I did that. About 6 months after that, someone reached out to me and was like, hey, I want to manage artists. Would you want to come and help me out with a lot of their digital representation? At the time, we brought an artist over from Australia to Orlando, Florida, where I was living, and we paid for this kid to have an artist visa, and we were able to get him on Hype Machine every single time by just getting him on all the blogs that Hype Machine tracked. Hype Machine, back in Bloghouse days, was the largest syndicate of up-and-coming music, and we just had a formula for getting on Hype Machine and getting Machine #1s every single time. 6 months later, we signed the second artist we started managing to Sony Music, and to me it was like a loss of the creative direction that we wanted to maintain, and I was pretty bitter about it. So I started thinking, one, I really, really, really hate the music industry. I've now left it 3 times, but it was a good lens to look at through Bitcoin, because through curation and financing and potentially programming licenses and fanship and patronage for that matter, Bitcoin provided a really, really cool global solution to a lot of the problems in both curation, discovery, and other problems I saw in music. So enough about me. Let's talk about decentralization in music. This little clicker here. So there's 3 main pillars, and this is how I want to put it. We often think or say that the internet broke the music industry. That's just absolutely not true. Peer-to-peer technology broke the music industry, specifically with Napster. As the music business relates to music, it was peer-to-peer technology that first uprooted the supply chain and its businesses as we know it. This happened with the creation of Napster. Distribution of music in 1999 was a $15 billion market globally, dominated by CDs and dependent on an enormous amount of physical infrastructure. This was like retail stores, trucks, actual like manufacturing plants for printing CDs, right? It was a huge business, and it largely was just wiped out overnight by Napster. But that was incomplete. As peer-to-peer networks abolished the entire business of music via disruption or via distribution, they didn't enable sufficient infrastructure for payments to thrive in a decentralized peer-to-peer way. So here we are, almost 20 years later. Music industry has largely, as we knew it then, been destroyed. But we think we have something now, right? So from 1999 to 2009, recorded music sales and licensing revenue fell from what, $15 billion to right around $6 billion. That's a massive wipeout, right? Ad-supported streaming such as Pandora, YouTube, and Spotify helped bring that back up, but there was still a lot of issues with that, and I'll get into that. These companies were not built on peer-to-peer networks either. That's important to note. These were just, it was conventional centralized architecture. So I'll make a point about how, you know, as a fan, you might go on MySpace Music back in 2004, follow a couple artists, create a couple playlists, MySpace goes down, you lose all of that connection. Then you go over to YouTube, you do the same thing. You follow a couple artists on like Vivo, then that doesn't really become popular, and SoundCloud becomes popular. You lose all those connections. So do the artists. You go on SoundCloud, you lose all those connections now because Spotify. And this is going to keep happening unless we actually have something underpinning all of this in that relationship. So meanwhile, the music business played a reactionary game, not an innovative one. Never has, and it hasn't yet to date. There's been like exploration, but the music industry itself has had to play a reactionary game because, you know, there's punks out there that will just disrupt it very easily. BitTorrent pushed the envelope of distribution, but the two remaining pillars and a technical solution for a new music ecosystem remained absent. That's where Ethereum comes in. So this whole like theory of blockchain for music largely enters as streaming takes off. So for the first time, we have this huge disparity of what artists know their music is being, like how much their music is being played, but how much they're actually getting paid. So like with iTunes, you have digital downloads with CDs, you have actual sales, tangible sales, your record can go platinum and you know that, but for the first time you can say, holy shit, my music has been played 1 million times this week, yet I'm getting paid less than ever. So artists call foul, particularly songwriters call foul, and meanwhile, blockchain's sitting there like this huge theoretical solution. Adele, best album of the year, 25, never let it on Spotify. Taylor Swift revokes her catalog off Spotify. Streaming was the villain, right? Smart contracts, meanwhile, are like this huge solution for royalties. A theoretical one, but just like a glaring example of what's possible. This was just the start. So Ethereum put forth the greatest tool for reimagining the relationship between musicians and fans that technology has ever provided. This isn't a solution of just royalty payments, this is fan and artist interactions. And that's really where this started to become powerful and really became interesting. So since 2014, the music business's attention on blockchain as a solution has come way ahead of schedule. The development, though, has not. But let's step away from like decentralization of music. What's important is to understand like the legal frameworks and licensing for this, because that really kind of justifies how complicating this all is. So a song is 2 pieces of copyright. You have the recording and a composition. So recording's like the tangible medium. Think analog era, like vinyl, CDs. It's much easier to think about all of this stuff through. Recording's like the actual recorded work done in a studio. The composition is the actual written song, like the sheet music. This has become increasingly blurred, but these are typically managed by 2 different parties and have different licensing frameworks. So in America, I will use America as an example. I'm from the US, and America is rarely ever less complicating than anywhere else, with few exceptions, so it's a good example. Basically, you have one side collecting one royalty and another collecting the other. The recording is licensable. There's royalties based on the consent decree, statutory rates for the composition. So this is pretty straightforward, right? As it relates to streaming, though, there are two royalties. We have a blanket license and a mechanical license. Depending on what kind of application you are, you have to pay both. So for a blanket license, that's like a broadcast. Think like radio, venue, retail stores, restaurants. That all comes from the analog era. You would pay like a blanket license to a performing rights society via like an annual subscription, and then they, based on a market share, would distribute royalties. That was like just out of sake of convenience at the time in an analog era. It was too much paperwork to actually go down, hunt down set lists of what actually is being played. There's a lot of problems there, but it worked effectively. People were satisfied. On the other hand, you have mechanical licenses. This is the right to reproduce. Not a right to reproduce, but a royalty you owe every single time you reproduce something. There was a lawsuit with Pandora on whether or not actually streaming a song is reproducing it, and it turns out that a stream is a reproduction, which now just makes this increasingly complicating. So as it relates to different licenses, there are different rates. There's interactive and non-interactive. Interactive is easy. It's like a deliberate selection of music on Spotify. Like, I want to play this song. Non-interactive, it's passively listening to it via, like, you know, the Genome Project on Pandora, right? Still pretty straightforward. Make sense? So the rates are predicated on how you access that music. Are you subsidized or are you not subsidized? There's actually different royalty rates on whether or not you are a paying user, say $10 a month, or whether or not you have a 14-day free trial or have ads supporting that actual consumption. So this is studies. You can kind of follow it back up and see where the different royalty rates are. So did I skip ahead? Yeah, so this leaves out like other countries. So I'm an American. Let's say that someone picks up my recording, they get the rights to it, and they play it in South Africa, or let's say France. So is SESM going to pay me, the Performing Rights Society here? No. That's called neighboring rights. I would actually have to have a publisher or a management team that is registered in France so that I can make that money back. Add more complexity to this, the different exchange rates for this. This is like we're dealing with over 100 currencies as it relates to collecting societies across the globe. When you want to trace all this back, it usually takes long periods of time. I actually had insight that a major label likes neighboring rights because they leave money in certain countries and gain interest on it. They're running a credit business. They're not really in the music business, right? So it's sort of problematic. It's like we have this assumption that, hey, we could solve all of this for you. And then we find out, like, no, we actually make a lot of money on gaining interest on holding that money where we do. Okay. So 2 forms of copyright, 2 royalties that relate to streaming, 2 modes of consumption, all of which has to be paid through different parties at different rates. This still sounds like a fun problem to solve. Yeah, so what this results in is more the confusion. Slow to move supply chain, legal red tapes, and opaque licensing deals have become the norm. Artists not getting paid is an overused blatant statement, so let's forget that. How much more can artists get paid if we start to break down these obstacles? And better yet, how many new artists can start to get paid if we just eliminate all these obstacles altogether? Like, if I'm just someone who now uses digital instruments in my bedroom and want to put something up on SoundCloud, I'm sure as hell not going to use a manager, a publisher to go around to every single country and sign me up with the collecting society in that respective place. It just doesn't make sense. Yet we're in a digital world and we don't have this infrastructure. So that all is, you know, pretty boring and cumbersome, right? Let's use a metaphor because I think it's important to bring it back. We're not necessarily talking about a commodity. Music is a lot like food. I actually love this metaphor. Unlike, you know, the music business and it has its put out, think of music like food. Sure, it's a commodity in some places, but it's also something you can create in your own home for your family, right in front of them, live, and serve them. It's a cultural piece of artifact. Every different region has their own different tastes, their own different styles. Everyone has their own interpretation of it. Everyone has their own intentions with it. Certainly, it's like, you know, big business, but at the same time, is the big business obstructing the actual consumption of it on a cultural level? Think like GMOs in America, agribusiness in America. Think about that like the music business and like, you know, an organic local farm-to-table farmer as someone who's just jamming out. let's not forget that this is something that's ubiquitous across humanity. It's important. So you're probably wondering where Ujo fits into all of this. So I'll give you a brief history. In 2014, Ujo was like a music platform idea with the conception of Consensus. So founded by Joe Lubin along with Consensus, there was this idea that given the obvious nature of smart contracts applying to royalties, music is a great use case for Ethereum. So at the time it was like, all right, let's build towards this idea of an entirely shared world computer that everything fluidly operates on. We were not actually making any compromises on architecture. We weren't looking to like stage a front end using a normal database. None of that. It was like, let's use Ethereum for everything, and let's actually just build along the trajectory in which the development of Ethereum happens. So this is that struggle of going to market versus building towards decentralization. So we were sourcing ideas, talking to people, getting other ideas. People were coming in and coming out, giving like, different use cases, and the ideas were just endless. Everything from like financing events to ticketing events, everything around music, people wanted to use blockchain for it. Who knew it would blow up even more? So fast forward to 2015, continued ideating, planning, a lot of that, brought some people in. At DevCon 1 in November in China, the Koala IP working group formed with Simon de Louvière, who's an Ujo and Consensus member. Basically, it was like, how can we take copyright and legal frameworks and migrate them into schemas that work in a content addressable network? A lot of what we were talking about was solving a lot of the music industry's problems, like actually settling the differences of who owns what on the composition and recording side. Wasn't necessarily a problem that needed blockchain, but maybe something that just needed to move into like an object-oriented storage network. Just like, okay, well, this is great. Layer that in with Ethereum and you can really do a lot of cool stuff. So towards the end of that year, at the same time, the Ujo team released, global collaborating team released the Imogen Heap prototype. This was the first use of smart contracts for dividing royalty payments. You can see here we had different licenses: download license, stems, streaming, sync policy, and a Sennheiser contract. At the time, this was really cool, but it was also really cumbersome. It had its own wallet, it was like clunky, and it was really, really graphic. So fast forward to 2016, and the music business, very susceptible to being disrupted, hence Napster was like, okay, what is this blockchain stuff? How can we actually get ahead of this? So the Open Music Initiative was created. This was a cross-industry global effort to explore inefficiencies in music supply chain founded by Berklee School of Music in Boston, the United States, and in collaboration with MIT and Intel. There was a lot of members. There was over 200 members spanning both the tech side and the music business. Everyone from Jack, Chain, Resonate, Ujo, to like Spotify, Pandora, major 3 labels, and even like Red Bull Media was a part of this. Everyone was in this thing because blockchain was going to be the next big thing. Effectively, we explored applications at the same time on our own, or Ujo did on their own, for composition and recording database. It was a non-market fit at the time and fell short of what the full potential we saw was. I was like, great, we could build this for you, you can maintain the IP, but it misses the full point of what we want to do with Ethereum. And that's more of like, yeah, we can migrate you into these new structures, build APIs, and make this all content addressable for you. But we didn't really want to do that. So we had a chicken and the egg problem. If we're not going to build something for music and it's extremely expensive to license it, what are we going to do? Because we can't demonstrate what we want to do with music without it, and we certainly can't enable any cool fan features without it either. So with the complexities of licensing music, bottlenecks eliminated end to end, like, if we're working for a PRO and they have to go through fiat and some paper trails to get to, like the Harry Fox agency or a label, it just didn't make sense. So 2017, we drew a line in the sand. Whoa, that's 2018. 2017, line in the sand. product segment and focus. Let's go after unencumbered musicians. There are so many musicians across the globe that don't have a label deal, don't have a publishing deal, and aren't even registered with the Performing Rights Society. Those are those collecting societies. So what we did was we said, hey, look, this solves the chicken and the egg problem. It's not great. It's hard to maybe grow traction off of this segment, but it'll get us out in the market to experiment with some of our assumptions. So by building this, we were focused on people with the idea that there's a proliferation of digital instruments. So many people have digital instruments on their MacBooks right now, and computers across the globe. So many people can upload music to SoundCloud. You can make music and there's music that's been made that's made top 40 charts at Billboard with a literal laptop keyboard. This to us was like a no-brainer. Okay, let's go after that segment just to experiment some of our assumptions against. Combine that with like the writing and recording process, that difference of recording and composition, that's sort of been blurred and become intrinsic. If you're in Ableton, you're playing around with different instruments, effectively writing a song as you're also recording it. Rarely do those types of people ever send it to a studio to be mastered unless they actually get a label deal. So these people need services or infrastructure that serves them the security that they need as an individual creator. So in 2017, we started building that product, but this is many different pieces that we had been working on to date. With the Qual IP, we built a JavaScript implementation. Alex Attar did that. We also built Constellate, which is an IPFS file persistence layer. This will work with Swarm as well. We did a lot of interviews and market research, basically just to do our own due diligence, but we learned a lot through that. And we also released our private alpha of the Creators Portal, which was like super buggy, and it was just a registration flow for artists at the time. It was only supply facing. There was nowhere to push your music to, but it used a lot of these open source and decentralized components that we were really excited about getting out there. So then, yeah, fast forward to 2018. This is live, the Creators Portal. It's on Rinkeby testnet right now. You can go to ujomusic.com, go and click Try Alpha, and check this out. But effectively, it's an application level implementation of that ecosystem that we've been building towards. It allows creators to register themselves associated with an Ethereum address that they register with using MetaMask. They can register, after registering themselves, their music group, and then they can register a release. This could be a single, this could be a full LP, what have you. But basically, this just models current copyright frameworks and licensing frameworks, but merging the recording and the composition. Right now it's on Rinkeby, but you can go in as a single user, register a single music group, and push as many releases as you want. Cool thing about that is that when you actually register your release, you can set different license policies for each. Right now we're only offering a download license, which you can control the rate of, but in the future, this is a supply-side implementation of an ecosystem where many demand applications can come in and plug in, and then determine what kind of additional licenses we offer. So the user is always going to maintain control, but you can actually go in and create many different licenses that can be picked up via registry. So I'll get into that, but right now on the Rinkeby testnet, we only allow one user to make up a music group. With our mainnet release in May, it's going to be a multi-stakeholder music group enabled. So multiple people can comprise a music group, which finally realizes that vision of dividing payments immediately. So yeah, what are we currently using? We're using Ethereum. We're using it for payment right now. We may or may not stick with that for the long term. We don't have a lot of traction, nor are we prioritizing getting market traction. Again, this is just to validate a lot of technical and UX assumptions we have. So we're using Ethereum for licensing as well, which is pretty cool and something that is really powerful. So with every purchase, we actually give a badge out, which is not effectively the license, but it's a signification of ownership of that digital download. And I will caveat the digital download. It's something we want to move away from, right? Because if a file goes offline, you don't know how many times it's being played. You lose a lot of the power that you have with Ethereum. But if a Spotify plugs in and we have a stream license, then this is actually starting to become powerful. We're using IPFS. We're storing the metadata that we create in Qual IP on IPFS. We're pinning it up via Ethereum. We have Constellate for that. We're using IPLD. We're not referencing anything via IPLD at this time, but we're basically putting CIDs on all of those different registrations because we're moving towards that like Merkleized forest that Juan Benet is known for, terming. We're using MetaMask for wallet, and then obviously, you know, this is not all wholly decentralized. We're using AWS for storing and serving the site. So Simon made a good point. You know, this architecture requires UJO to exist at various places: indexing, payment, validation, and file disbursement. UJO provides the centralized components that are necessary for it to work at this point in time, but this is not something we want to do long term. Again, it gets us to market, but this is something that we really want to decentralize in the future as the space grows up. So yeah, what's that ecosystem look like? We're going to be announcing a lot of this stuff soon and open sourcing a lot of it. It's open source as it is, but we're not really publicizing it. But our creator and license registry, we're going to have those collectible tokens in places where you can actually have value for them. So applications that plug in and say, hey, you have that token, you purchased the 5th album of that artist release, great, like I'll trade to you at this rate, or just a place to exchange them for not necessarily monetary value, but like social clout value. Indexing, searching API gateways. This will be important and critical. We're doing some pretty cool stuff with porting over Discogs and MusicBrainz information, which we'll be talking about in the future. Open law integration. Open law is another consensus project, but basically dynamic legal agreements. So in the actual interface, we're going to be using all the information you put, and that will actually create a legal agreement that we'll put on IPFS. And then, of course, that will be content addressable, and we'll be issuing those to the purchasers when they purchase something as well. And then there's going to be applications cross-platform. I think we're moving away from the supply chain that's linear with many, many intermediaries to a circular one with many, many on-ramps and off-ramps. And all this stuff just sits in the middle, and it's maintained by Ethereum and decentralized architecture. So thank you. Yeah, I just want to give a shout out to the whole UJO team, Joe Lubin and everyone at Consensus, and the asset team for organizing this. And just to wrap up, this technology from its inception has been incredibly inspiring. What started with unique financing events for artists with Bitcoin was blown open with Ethereum. The ways of funding, recording, distributing, and discovering music can now all be reimagined. With the balance of working with the existing players and experimenting with new ideas, we're heading towards a really exciting future. Thanks, guys.
So hello everyone, I'm put on my Jack hat right now. I was wearing the Swarm hat in the morning. So Jack has been a company in the music and blockchain space for quite a while, since the beginning really. So we're fully on the bandwagon to solve this problem of the music and media industries, and namely seeing the problem coming from centralization and anachronistic technology, and kind of try to foster these new technologies in this domain by contributing technology where you can directly link as much as you can the end users of creative content production and consumption. So basically creative content producers and fans or content consumers. Now in this kind of big agenda, obviously the best kind of end product that you can imagine is some sort of decentralized YouTube or decentralized Spotify. So obviously you need to have a component where where you store content, and content distribution is linked directly to to technologies which can handle, financing and can handle like this kind of micro licensing or paying for royalties, and therefore you need a whole ecosystem which is decentralized and able to eliminate the middleman, or can come up with kind of more efficient solutions than currently exist. So this may sound very ambitious, and as Jack mentioned earlier, who kind of set the stage quite nicely for us, explaining the problems with the current models. Obviously, we also had faced this problem of going to market. Our answer to this dilemma was to kind of isolate the components that can individually be useful in stages. So a first attempt was to realize that. Sorry, how can I?
I'm sorry.
Okay. So we started out advertising our product, the Meta network, which was supposed to handle media copyright, and this component is definitely needed in any system which aspires to fuel kind of a licensing platform, any kind of monetization for current content. Why is that? Because you have to respect the current legal situation where copyright is protected by law, and licensing needs to respect copyright owners, and therefore you need an authoritative database, basically a global view of rights, which when authoritative, people can trust in order to figure out when they license a content who to pay. So this problem was meant to be solved by the Meta network, which we now rename, and we kind of hereby announce the new name, which is Chord. Chord as in record and accord. So record as in register copyright owners and their creative content, and accord as in reach consensus over them. So have some authoritative database. So I scroll down to the next slide. So what problems we need to solve with this? First of all, we need to answer the question: how do we represent knowledge or information about copyright ownership, about songs, videos, etc., and also how this information can be utilized by the actual consumer services or clients, for example, a licensing engine or any kind of higher level application that uses licensing, for example, the proverbial decentralized on Spotify. So what we need to solve for this is obviously to have a way in which we can trust the association of say, a wallet address and a particular song. For this, you need to verified identities. Basically, you need to link real-world identities to digital identities. This is a problem that a lot of people target to solve in this blockchain space. Seems like a quite simple problem, but it's actually not. And second of all, you need to also need consensus over the accuracy of copyright ownership claims. So basically, to ultimately link digital assets to their owners, and by conversely link digital assets to wallets, which can then serve as a kind of smart content item in the sense that whenever you use a particular content, it knows about its licensing criteria and provides a very transparent and easy way for applications to handle royalty payments if they wish to be lower abiding and respect these licensing arrangements. So what we need to have is basically a global view of rights, or with less glorified terms, it's basically an attribution database, which is definitely a stage that's needed in this process. So our way to going to market is to first build this component, and which is ideally suited for the blockchain and Swarm. So what we're gonna use is we basically representing IP information and also identity information as RDF graphs, and this is kind of the representational solution, and store these RDF triples representing the claims on Swarm, and when we use smart contracts to regulate basically the business process of how certain conflicting claims are resolved, and how an authoritative view of conflicting information emerges, basically giving rise to a global view of rights. So how do you do that? This is basically the problem of content curation. Now, a decentralized storage mechanism which links certain data to digital identities, for example, through the Ethereum name service, is perfectly well suited to represent conflicting data, in the sense that you can have the claims and statements and assertions linked to a particular identity, and that on Swarm is very cheap to fork the truth, so to say. So you can have just a slightly changed version of a knowledge graph and put your own opinion in one little bit that your opinion is different from another source. So the point is that putting RDF graphs and knowledge graphs on Swarm and linking them to identities is a perfect solution to represent basically an epistemic modality. So basically to represent everyone's view of the truth. However, how is the real truth emerges from that? This is the age-old problem of having a single source of truth is what's actually a useful product. It's in the same way as age-old institutions like the land registry. They are useful only if there's only one of them, there's a consensus over them. So this is the same problem. In general, this problem is called data curation, and there are various ways in which data curation and the quality control of the ultimate emerging truth can be incentivized. The basic model for that, which is used, is token curated registries. There's interesting ways in which you can evolve these ideas and combine token curated registries with incentivization of not only incentivizing basically authorities that you trust, and then therefore with people staking certain tokens, they increase the reputation of certain authorities, but at the same time they can indicate the importance or popularity of certain content items, and possibly give even a stake, and allow various novel ways of monetizing content creation. So it has far-reaching possibilities. All these models are going to be worked out in the near future, and so the notion which I would like to introduce here is the notion of a guardian. A guardian is basically an expert, which can be an agent, any kind of AI or actually a human that using their expert knowledge or any kind of organization. And these guardians will basically cover certain topics. Certain topics are matched to particular IP statements. For example, you can have a domain expert on music recording rights in the UK, and that's a particular organization, and by virtue of they having data about such associations of identities to music recording claims in the UK, they can acquire reputation and in a kind of decentralized emergent way, guardians will emerge whose decision on these curated claims will constitute the single source of truth and the global view of rights. Now going back to the original, so basically the global view of rights is reached with the help of guardians and an incentive mechanism based on token curated registries, and obviously, as I mentioned before, this global view of rights or attribution database is ideally the first stepping stone towards a more extensive framework. First of all, it can be used by some licensing engine, which you can imagine as the backend for any kind of decentralized content distribution system, and also in the domain of IP, you can also extend it to like trademarks, logos, and brands, or patents like engineering, creative works, etc. And having this notion of smart content, which as I said, is the idea that you bring in other aspects of the supply chain of creative content consumption. For example, in the case of using decentralized storage, you can imagine a streaming service using a like say Swarm, and reporting usage statistics, which are provable usage statistics to the music licensing platform, and therefore there could be automatic royalty payments initiated and based on the curated authoritative global view of rights. So such a system is extremely powerful because it basically brings a lot of these services which are currently handled by 1,000-member organizations. It can virtually automate a lot of these processes, and therefore it has the promise of making the costs really low. So I kind of end with this, and just introduce my colleague Luke, who's going to talk about the kind of the UI, the view to this underlying network, which is currently at prototype stage, and he's going to talk about like how you can actually use that, what an admin dashboard, so to say, to this testnet could look like, and is looking like. Thanks.
And hopefully show you a little prototype of the first product that's been put out under the Chord banner, which is the Chord DApp. So, as Vic said, the Chord DApp is essentially an interface to the underlying mechanics in the Chord network. Today has kind of three main points of functionality: the ability to create a graph in the network, the ability to make claims and attach those to that graph, and the ability to query those graphs. Is that okay? Cool. So now we're going to seamlessly switch over to the video. So just while we're setting that up, what we've done is we've placed the concept of identity at the core of the cord network. And the reason we do this is so that we can really just verify that agents in the network are who they say they are. I'm just going to put that on pause. And that the statements they're making are actually true, and we can infer trust from those statements. An identity can be thought of as an aggregation of all your existing identifiers. And by identifiers we mean anything from a PGP key to a social media account. And the idea of an identity in cord is to aggregate all of those things. So essentially an identity in cord is a graph which is made up of cryptographically verified claims. So what I'll do now is just show you how that looks in a DApp. So what we've done here is this is a prototype at this stage. We've just simplified it for purposes of demonstration. So I'll take you through that now. So what we'll look at first is the yeah, so what we'll look at first is the journey of creating a new graph. So we call that registering an identity. And at the core of an ID is essentially an Ethereum public key. You can either use an existing key store, or we also offer the ability to create a new key store for those who don't have one. So to register, what we essentially do here is send a signed transaction to the network and add a new entry to the cord registry under that public key. And now that public key becomes your cord ID. So the timings might be slightly out on this video. Magic. So there's a brief setup section just after you've registered your cord ID. And here we're just attaching some superficial profile data to an identity. And as you can see here, a new identity has been created. We've got a little avatar there and a name. So profile data in a network is essentially just another claim, a statement that you've made about your identity. And this is a self-signed claim that you place into your graph. But other agents can come along and countersign that and say, yeah, that looks like you, and that's your name. Yep. So as Vic mentioned, we have the concept of guardians in the network. And guardians essentially provide authority services by running guardian nodes. And here we're going to talk about just one example of a guardian, which could be Keybase. And Keybase would provide this authority service underneath the wider umbrella of identity. So to make a claim, you basically send a request to the cord guardian, usually attaching some sort of proof along with that the guardian can use to verify that claim is actually genuine. So we've sent that claim, got verified, luckily, and there you go. You can see that claim's been added to your graph. You can view it, and it's visible in the network for others to explore as well. And so on the flip side, we can search for other cord IDs just by inputting their public address, a very short public address. And then we go. We've searched for Mr. Fred Tibbles, and he's actually got two claims. He's got a Keybase claim, and he's also cannily connected his UPort account as well. And that concludes the prototype. Okay. Switch back. Cheers, dude. Cool. So, what we're just going to do now is quickly take a look at some of the architecture that underlies that that DApp that we just saw. So we're just going to take a look at all the different points in the architecture and the tools that we've used to make up that stack. And we're just going to look at the data flow that goes along with that on the right-hand side there. So first and foremost, a DApp can exchange data with nodes running in the core network. And each of those nodes exposes a GraphQL API. This allows the client to declaratively define their data requests whilst allowing the node to maintain a nice lightweight universal API. And for all you old school Web 2 developers out there, we're using React, Redux, and a little bit of style components for the flourishes there. And then on the testnet, as I said, GraphQL and Go. So yeah, it's just simple little GraphQL queries you can see there. All that's doing is saying, please give me some claims. All the claims are related to this chord ID. Okay, so as well as queries, that GraphQL API also exposes some mutation operations. So in this case, a mutation would be create a new graph. So here we have the DApp sending the mutation to the node. The node verifies the signature that's come along with that transaction, and if all is okay, then the chord ID is sent to the chord registry, which is a smart contract running on Ethereum, which essentially just maps public addresses to the graph hash. Okay. So as I mentioned in the walkthrough, profile data are essentially self-signed claims. And the raw data itself, so the image or a piece of text, that's stored on Swarm. And the hash that we get back from Swarm makes up the claim value. And that's what's actually stored in the user's graph. And then a DApp can just fetch that data from Swarm and render it as per usual. Yep. So the other point in that stack are these chord guardians. And at the moment, they are simply microservices running on the chord guardian node. And from a DApp, a user can send a statement about their identity. And then the chord guardian will run some verification checks. Primarily, they'll check that the transaction has a valid signature, and they also run any additional verification checks. And that's entirely up to the implementer, right? So that could be OAuth, it could be multi-factor auth, it could be JWT or TLS Notary, for example. So the Guardian would run those verification checks, and providing they were all successful, it would return a verified claim. And that's an example of a verified claim there. And this verified claim is actually what ends up in your chord graph, and is distributed throughout the network there. Alrighty. So as I mentioned, we're currently developing the DApp, And the plan is to release this at the end of March at our dev meetup in London, which you're all invited to, if you're going to be in London, obviously. It's on March the 29th. Our website's there, chord.network. So hit that up for all your additional links, including our GitHub. And we've got all the open source code on there. Yeah, I think that's it. Open to questions. Q&A. Any questions out there for myself, Victor? Sweet. Okay. No questions. That's cool. Well, we're wearing these hoodies. So yeah, come and find us, and we'd love to have a chat about anything we've presented, any of the concepts, especially the tech stack. We'd love to have a chat about that as well. All right, thanks very much.